Good evening and welcome once again to Searchlight. Tonight we have a very distinguished guest. He's the political advisor to the PLO leader, Mr. Yasser Arafat. He's also a member of the Central Committee of Al-Fatah, which is the mainstream faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. He was here to attend the Fourth Republican inauguration, and we would like to take the opportunity to let him give us an idea on what is happening in occupied territories. So first of all, welcome to Searchlight. You must tell us really what you think before we even get into the question of Palestine about the inaugural ceremony that you have attended.
It was very impressive, I tell you, and to me also quite delightful. I have followed the development in Ghana over the last 10, 11 years. There's so much tie-in between Ghana and the Palestinian people. We look to you as a vanguard African country which is really was born in a liberation movement and continued to grow and develop as such, even though it has become a stable state. It has become an economically viable and developing country. And so one really felt that after your drive for political stability, which you have achieved, and after your drive for economic development, which you have become quite a phenomenon to the World Bank and many institutions in the world, you have ventured into developing your democracy into new forms, allowing greater participation and allowing a greater check on the growth and development of your country. It is something that to us is highly appreciated. We felt the intimacy of the people, the relationship with the president very much, and it reflected very well on the development that you're going through. We are proud of being also a democratic institution, and therefore we feel that the bonds that tie our people with yours are going to be strengthened as a result of your move. I think the role you're going to play as a vanguard and a leader in Africa will be strengthened with that move.
I'm interested in your views, sir, about what is essentially a theoretical question, again related to our move towards creating a liberal democratic climate. So there are people who feel that a certain authoritarian type of government is important for economic progress. Now that we've made a move towards a liberal democratic culture, isn't this going to be a break on development?
I think you have to be careful in developing a synthesis between the needs of stability, which requires authority, and the needs of democracy, which bring in participation, allow the generation of new ideas, and allow the commitment of so many people to this new ideas in the world of privatization and the global economy. It is a mix that you have to work out yourself to create a Ghanaian experience in doing it. But I don't see a contradiction. I see the setting of the stage, which has been done over the last 10 years, and now the confidence of going more into a greater participation and greater division of the centers of decision-making. It requires, I think, guts and a willingness to trust in the people more, but you will still need your central government, you need your discipline, and you'll still need that confidence that is so important between the people and their leadership.
So you talk about the excellent cooperation between Palestine and Ghana. Tell us what are some of the areas that you consider most important?
You know, as a people in search of a real exercise of sovereignty over their own land, which has been occupied for such a long time, our cause is so much enmeshed in an international setting. We are a people in need of recognition from the world as a people who have a right of self-determination over their country, something that Ghana has passed long time ago. And therefore it is so important that we get that international recognition and we fight off the attempts of our enemy to deprive us of such. Ghana has really steadfastly and without exception stood by the PLO and stood by the Palestinian people, and sometimes when it was difficult, sometimes when it really required a real brother who believes in the long run.
Yes, but when you say that, what do you mean? In international fora?
Absolutely. In many cases where there was attempts by our enemies to deprive us of international recognition, to put limitations on our demand for exercise of sovereignty, to take us out of the map, as it may. Ghana stood by. I can count many situations in the non-aligned movement, in the relationship with the West, in international meetings, in the United Nations. I think in the Security Council, I mean, when Ghana was a member, whenever there was a need for the PLO, for the Palestinian people, to really, for a friend to stand by them in creating this international recognition, Ghana was there, and that's why we recognize that, we appreciate it, and I think it also we feel a responsibility of committing ourselves to Ghana and staying with it when the days come when we'll be able to be a real asset for Ghana in the world.
So let's look a little more closely now, since you've introduced that at the whole question of the PLO and so on. So this is interesting. How do you function in the absence of a certain kind of geographical entity? Tell us about it.
Well, it has been very difficult. The reason is we are not facing a typical colonial situation, whereby you have a colonialist country occupying another, using its armed forces, and the end of the problem would be for that colonialist to pack up and go, for his army to leave. In our case, we're very much like the South African case. We have a settler colonialism. We have colonialists who have come from Europe, settled our country, but because they were historically the persecuted, the victim. The Jews in Europe has been a victim, but they have been the victim of the white man, not of our people. And as the victim of the white man, they have come to be victimizer in our case, trying to take away our country, trying to settle it and call it their own. And this is really what makes our case a particularly difficult one.
Yeah.
A struggle not only to send the army of the occupier away, but a struggle to reassert your own entity, your identity as a people with rights, and then to fight off a very oppressive occupation.
So, it sounds like a very complex problem. At the moment, there are Israelis occupying the territory. Is it a question of them going away and giving you the land? Or is this a question of them living side by side?
We have, in effect, made two historical proposals to our enemies. One, which is the same one that Nelson Mandela has shepherded and have called for all his struggle, which is to live together, the white settler as it may, and our black people as it is, to live together in one country with one person, one vote, which we call the idea of a democratic, non-sectarian, secular state in Palestine. This, the Israelis refused to accept. And therefore we moved into the idea of a two-state solution, in which the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, which had been occupied in 1967 by the Israelis, to become an independent Palestinian state, and to try to live side by side as two states, two independent states, asserting the right of the Palestinian people to return to their land and to establish their independent state on part of Palestine.
And how did you react to this second proposal?
Well, I think there is much more support for that second proposal. Most of the people who, in Israel, who accepted the two-state solution and fought for it against the cabinet of Likud and Mr. Shamir in the past, who rejected any idea of peace, today are in the government. Truly, Mr. Rabin, who is the Prime Minister of Israel today, have not yet really lived up to all the expectations he has made.
Is he more flexible, really?
Well, his cabinet is more flexible, but he is really remains very much an obstinate man with a lot of ideas of the past. But he is ruling over a cabinet which has a majority of the people who stood by the peace camp before they became elected. Our hope is that increasing number of Israelis stand by the ideas of equality, stand by the idea of freedom for the Palestinian people, for the own good of the Israelis and not only for the good of the Palestinians, so that Mr. Rabin eventually changes his mind and is really persuaded to accept the ideas of peace based on equality and freedom. Otherwise, our struggle will continue, which still is continuing.
When you talk about the struggle, immediately you bring my mind to what in many ways has been quite heroic. I'm referring to the Intifada, which is perhaps entering its 6th year.
Absolutely.
You know, you see these images, sir, of people throwing stones, coming up against people with guns and tanks. Right. Initially, when you see the images, you think this is hopeless. And yet it's been going for so long.
Yes, absolutely. This is probably the third wave of our struggle. We have struggled in a varieties of ways. For 30 years under British occupation, we had 6 revolutions against the British occupation. And then when the Israelis came over and took our country, we developed our armed struggle from outside Palestine, trying to return our land inside. And that has been going on since 1965. But then in 1987, our people thought that maybe we have to struggle with sticks and stones again, using a mixture of Guevara and Gandhi, if you wish. The idea of a struggle of the people, by the people, that takes so many forms of self-sacrifice, of resurrection, of struggling with passive means, but also with other limited means of violence that express our rejection of the occupation, our resistance against occupation, against racism, and against the attempt to put down our people. This is the Intifada. It is really more than sticks and stones. It's the regeneration of a people who are telling their occupiers, we would like peace based on justice, but we will resist by everything we have your subjugation, your occupation, and your racism.
And so the Intifada will continue?
The Intifada will continue until we achieve a real, just, and lasting peace.
Yes. So let's look at another dimension of your struggle, Intifada being one side, and the peace talks that have been taking place for some time now. So what is the current state of affairs regarding the peace talks?
Well, the peace talks really started at the end of the Gulf War. And there are many factors that led to them. One was the Palestinian Peace Initiative that took place when the State of Palestine was declared back in 1988 as a result of the Intifada. And another was the changing world conditions with the dismantlement of the Cold War and the start of new realities in the world, in which probably the strategic importance of Israel itself was becoming much less, as it was a pawn in the war, the Cold War against the Soviet Union in the past.
Absolutely.
And so the changing strategic conditions and the Palestinian willingness to accept a two-state solution leading to just peace. And thirdly, obviously, the change that has taken place within the Israeli political situation, as just explained. These three together led eventually to our accepting to go through a negotiated solution. The negotiated solution had started with the Madrid conference, which caught the attention of the world, and then to the Washington-based negotiation, which has been going on for 13 months now. Obviously, some changes have taken place, but 7 months of these negotiations went ahead with Mr. Shamir, who declared immediately after his defeat that he was never intending to bring about any solution, that he wanted to go on negotiating for 10 years while he plants 500,000 new immigrants in our country. And so really...
is that continuing?
No. Now Mr. Shamir is out, and there is the new Labour government. And as I said, in the Labour government, there are people who would want to push this thing through and achieve some results. But there is a Prime Minister who prides himself on the fact that he has the iron fist policy against the Intifada, that he was the bone crusher of the resistance. So his image of himself still does not fit with a peaceful solution. And the last thing that really broke the negotiations and has stopped them, have actually in a way delayed everything, is this last measure that the Rabin government has made, which is to expel 400 Palestinians out of their own homes into the cold of Mount Hermon on the Lebanese-Palestinian border for absolutely no rule of law. I mean, there is, first of all, deportations and expulsions are against international law. No occupier has the right to change the demography of the people he occupies by deporting them out of their own country, by uprooting them from their own country. So that is illegal. But secondly, these people were not charged with anything. There's absolutely no legal procedure was taken against them. It was corporal public punishment of the worst kind to our people, because it meant mass transfer. It meant ethnic cleansing, as the word now used in Yugoslavia. It meant really a racist taking away of people from their homes and families and throw them out in the cold. That has, in a way, really stopped the negotiations. We are now awaiting an international action to get these refugee deportees back home.
You are demanding that they are returned.
They have to return. They have to. If we accept that this thing goes and gets accepted, then we accept a change in the rules, allowing the Israeli government to use the peace process as a cover-up for expulsions, for mass infractions of human rights of the Palestinian people. We can't allow that. It's enough that we have really went through this compromise to accept the division of our own country in order to create peace. But we will not accept emptying our own country in the process. And I think that is the call for equality and the rule of international law that has to be applied in this case.
So are you satisfied with the position of the international community with regard to some of these problems that you have just raised?
I'm not. I'm not, and I'm not really being very demanding. I know that the world is going through lots of changes. We are, you know, at one time people talked about a new world order, almost like a new brave world, based on morality and international legality. We don't yet have a new world. We don't really have a new world order. If anything, we have a new world disorder at the present time. So maybe this world order will build itself, but there's still a lot of double standards going on. In one instance, the international community sends hundreds of thousands of soldiers for the occupation of one part of the world, but on another instance, the world community is totally paralyzed at the sight of a similar occupation and similar violation of human rights. This double standard has to really end, and we have to strengthen the bonds of the international community through the United Nations. We have to recreate a new role of the world without fear. I know fear have dominated the world for a long while. Now we have less fear of a nuclear holocaust. We have less fear of a world pitting itself against each other. But that doesn't mean that our responsibility have ended there. I think particularly in the third world, we have to recreate our bonds through the non-aligned movement.
But there are people who say that the non-aligned movement is now irrelevant.
In its old form, it has lost a lot of the rationale for the old form. But the third world needs an organization that fights for its right against a lot of exploitation, against the burden of the debt, against the attempt to subjugate it, against the recurrence of Somalias and the recurrence of mass problems of hunger like this. We need to work together.
Yes, I agree.
There's a new need to reformulate a new world order based on morality and legality and self-interest. And this has not been done yet. And that is why we complain that we have not yet seen the international community come to our aid and stand by our rights, since we are desirous of real peace. We are not warmongers. We want real peace based on justice. But that requires an international support. We need international help.
You know, you're talking about support again. I mean, what about support from your own Arab brothers? I mean, sometimes it's almost as if the division within our own ranks, if you want, is perhaps the greatest problem.
Well, it is a problem. And I think this is something that we realize and recognize in the Arab world as much we do in Africa. I mean, the need to solve our problems, to really act as brothers, supporting each other, is in itself such a big asset when we succeed in doing it, and such a liability when we fail. But when we fail, we don't give up. We continue to see the need to solve these problems that have pitted us against each other. In the Arab world, no doubt, the Gulf War has been a major reason for the divisions that split the Arab world and led some parts of it to seek foreign assistance against another part. And to a great extent, and I'm not really assessing blame in this case, I think one can distribute the blame all over. I mean, I'm not in any way claiming any holier than thou attitude. I think many Arab states erred against each other that led to the split that was caused by the Gulf War. We have to end that split. That split has probably caused a paralysis. We are not getting Arab support. We are not getting any fruits of the complementary aspects of the Arab world, which have given part of our countries a wealth and have given part of our countries other assets. At this time, this is not really being supplementing of each other. There's no real support. I must admit that. But having said that, I'm not at all giving up. Yes. We're doing our best to bring back harmony. We're doing our best to bring the Arabs together. And it is for the cause of the Palestinians, for the Arab countries themselves, for their ability to bargain their way through this new world, and also for the benefits of Africa and Asia, in which our countries straddle the two continents and must play an important role in both.
So the United States is very powerful. It has just changed president. Does it give you any more hope? A democratic president?
Well, I think by and large, democratic presidents have been more interested in issues of human rights, in issues of national rights, in issues of disarmament, in issues of pollution and environmental control. And to that extent, one may hope that a Clinton at the helm in the United States might bring images of a Kennedy or a Carter, who by and large, I think, were more conscious of problems of national rights, human rights, and so on. Hopefully, more so than some of the other recent presidents in the United States have shown and have expressed. So in that sense, one may hope that the new president in the United States, particularly with some of his choices in his own cabinet, might reflect a greater understanding within the United States and outside it of the problem of the oppressed, be it the problems of the black and the yellow and the other races within the United States, of the problem of women and their problems in the United States, of the problem of the poor, of the problem of the aged, of the children, and so on. But one may hope that extends to the international environment. That is a hope. We have not yet seen it. And of course, there are other factors that affect a democratic president. He is the president of the United States with its own interest and its own problems. So let us hope, but at the same time, let us take matters into our own hands, fight for our own people, unite. I mean, that is...
So I'm still a little interested in the bit about the United States and the relationship. People believe that Israel is continued in this manner because of its own lobby in America and so on. Does Palestine feel the need to make certain inroads into the whole American fabric in order to perhaps have them more responsive to your problems?
I think so. I think it's a requirement, because the United States, being the most powerful country in the world today, has authority, but I think it has to assume with it responsibility. I mean, if it's the new Rome, then it has to be saddled with Rome's responsibility and not only Rome's authority. And in order for the United States to carry on these responsibilities, one also has to explain to its leaders and to its people his cause. And there is some obvious conflict of interest. The more powerful sometimes have less recognition of the rights and the moralities for the less powerful. But that is, I think, again, is our need to put our case right, to continue our struggle, but also to persuade the people and the government of the United States of our rights. And I think there is an opportunity that we may yet succeed.
So generally speaking, you think that the possibility of coming to some sort of compromise is better now?
I think so, but I don't minimize the necessity of continuing the struggle to keep our rights on the table. Having said that, I think the prospects are higher, and I am hopeful, I'm an optimist.
Finally, sir, what do? The peace talks more or less are stalled because of the expulsion. What if the Israelis refuse to have them come back? What is going to happen to the peace talks?
I think it's a legitimate question, but I think it's a little unfair to accept the fait accompli. Why should it be that we must accept that what the Israelis do will put the ball back in our court? I think that the ball is appropriately in Israel's courts. And Israel has to show the minimum respect for the Geneva Conventions, the minimum respect for the Security Council. And the United States, which has taken a very high moral tone when it intervened in the Gulf and in Somalia and very partially in Yugoslavia, must also assume its responsibility of invoking the Chapter 7 of the United Nations against Israel if it continues to refuse to accept the resolution of the Security Council. I think the peace process will get back on its rail, but that requires that Israel abide by the rules.
So now the final questions. Do you trust the UN?
I trust the principles of the UN. I trust what the UN was created to do and what it stands for. But I think there is a difference between wishes, desires on one hand, and capability on the other. The United Nations have to fashion a real independence from the world's greatest power, and has to start on its own working with one standard and applying it properly to the whole world. I think then my trust in the United Nations will increase, besides my desires and my objectives.
Mr. Nabil Shaath, thank you very much for coming. Well, our guest has been the PLO leader's representative to the inauguration of the Fourth Republic. He also took time off to tell us about the Palestinian situation. Join us again next week. Good night.